The moment 92-year-old Grace Thompson shuffled onto the voice stage with her walker, something extraordinary filled the air. Not because of her frail appearance, though her silver hair and gentle movements spoke of decades of life fully lived, but because of the profound weight of loss that seemed to emanate from her small frame. She wore a navy blue dress with small white flowers, the same dress she had worn to her husband's funeral just 2 weeks earlier, because William had always said it made her look like an angel. What nobody in that studio knew was that Grace hadn't spoken, let alone sung, since the day they lowered William into the ground. And what was about to happen would prove that some love stories are so powerful they can break and heal hearts simultaneously. Standing beside Grace was her granddaughter, Sarah, who had driven 8 hours from their small town in Nebraska to help her grandmother chase a dream that had been dormant for 70 years. Sarah squeezed Grace's trembling hand before stepping back, her own eyes already glistening with the kind of pride mixed with heartbreak that comes from watching someone you love face their deepest pain in public. Let me take you back to understand how this remarkable woman reached this stage. Because Grace's journey proves that some dreams wait a lifetime to be heard, and some love stories echo long after the voices that created them have gone silent. Grace Thompson had met William when she was 22 years old, working as a seamstress in a small dress shop in Omaha. William was a returning World War II veteran with kind eyes and calloused hands, from working construction, trying to rebuild not just the buildings destroyed by war, but his own sense of purpose in a world that had seen too much destruction. He would come into the shop with his mother to buy fabric, and Grace would catch him stealing glances at her while she worked at her sewing machine. "You have the voice of an angel," William had told her one afternoon when he caught her humming while she worked. It was the first personal thing he'd ever said to her, and Grace had blushed so deeply that Mrs. Patterson, the shop owner, had teased her about it for weeks. Their courtship was slow, gentle, conducted through shared songs and stolen moments between Grace's work shifts and William's construction projects. Grace would sing to him in the evenings when he came to call, her voice floating through the warm Nebraska air like a prayer made audible. William said her singing could heal anything: a hard day's work, a war veteran's nightmares, a broken heart finding its way back to hope. They married in 1952 in a small ceremony where Grace sang Ave Maria without any accompaniment except the love shining in William's eyes. For 70 years, their marriage was built on a foundation of music, of Grace's voice filling their home with songs that marked every milestone, every celebration, every quiet evening when words weren't enough, but melody could say everything. Grace sang lullabies to their 4 children, serenaded William on every anniversary, hummed while she cooked dinner, and while she tended their garden. But she had never sung for anyone except her family. Despite William's constant encouragement, despite his insistence that the world deserved to hear what he got to hear every day, Grace was too shy, too convinced that her voice was meant only for the small circle of people she loved most. "Someday, Gracie," William would say, using the pet name that only he was allowed to use, "someday you're going to share that voice with everyone. It's too beautiful to keep hidden forever." "My voice is just for you, William," Grace would always reply. "You're the only audience I ever need." As the years passed, their children grew up and moved away, but Grace and William remained in the same small house where they'd raised their family, where Grace's voice had provided the soundtrack to 7 decades of shared life. Even as their bodies aged and slowed, even as William's hearing began to fade and Grace's voice grew softer with age, their evening ritual never changed. Every night before bed, Grace would sing to William, usually Unchained Melody, the song that had been playing on the radio the first time they danced together. Everything changed on a quiet Tuesday morning in October. William, who had been battling heart disease for several years, simply didn't wake up. Grace found him peaceful in his sleep, a small smile on his face as if he'd been dreaming of something beautiful. The doctor said it was the gentlest way anyone could go, but for Grace, it felt like half her soul had been ripped away without warning. In the 2 weeks since William's funeral, Grace had retreated into silence. She couldn't bring herself to hum while she cooked, couldn't find comfort in the songs that had filled their home for 70 years. Her voice felt locked away with William, buried in a grief so profound that even breathing felt like too much effort. The idea to audition for The Voice came from Sarah, Grace's 28-year-old granddaughter, who had grown up listening to stories about her grandmother's beautiful voice but had rarely heard it herself. After the funeral, while going through William's belongings, Sarah had found a box of letters he'd written to Grace over the years, but never sent, love letters filled with his dreams that someday the world would hear what he got to hear every day. "Grandma," Sarah had said, holding one of the letters with tears in her eyes, "Grandpa wrote about your voice in every single one of these letters. He said it was his greatest regret that he never convinced you to share it with anyone else. Maybe it's time." Grace had laughed through her tears, a sound that was more sob than humor. "Sweet child, I'm 92 years old. My voice is gone with everything else that's old about me." "No, Grandma, your voice isn't gone. It's just waiting for the right moment to come back." The audition process had been complicated by Grace's age and frailty. The producers weren't sure how to accommodate someone so elderly, someone who needed assistance walking, someone whose entire audition was motivated by grief rather than ambition. But when they heard Grace's audition video, a shaky recording Sarah had made of her grandmother singing Unchained Melody while looking at William's photograph, they knew they had to find a way to make it work. Standing on the Voice stage now, Grace felt every one of her 92 years settling into her bones. The lights were brighter than anything she'd experienced, the audience larger than she'd ever imagined, the weight of the moment more overwhelming than she'd prepared for. But she also felt William's presence, as if he were standing just off stage, encouraging her the way he had for 70 years. Blake Shelton, Kelly Clarkson, John Legend, and Niall Horan sat in their red chairs, their backs turned, unaware that they were about to witness something that would redefine their understanding of what music could be, what love could endure, what the human heart could survive. "Take all the time you need, ma'am," Blake called out respectfully, his voice carrying that familiar Oklahoma gentleness that somehow felt like home to Grace. Grace adjusted her position at the microphone, her walker providing the stability she needed to stand. For a moment, she almost couldn't speak, not because of nerves, but because she was overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was about to do, something William had dreamed of for 70 years, something she was finally brave enough to attempt now that he wasn't there to see it. "Before I sing," Grace said, her voice soft but carrying clearly through the studio's sound system, "I need to tell you about my William." The coaches remained in their chairs, but something in her tone made them all lean forward slightly. "William and I were married for 70 years, Grace continued, her voice beginning to shake with emotion. "He passed away 2 weeks ago, and for 70 years, he told me I had the voice of an angel, but I was too shy, too scared to sing for anyone except him." The studio fell into respectful silence, everyone processing the weight of what they were hearing. Grace's voice broke as she continued. "He always said someday I would share my voice with the world. He said it was too beautiful to keep hidden. But I only ever wanted to sing for William. He was my whole world, my only audience, my reason for making music." She paused, wiping tears from her eyes with a handkerchief that had been William's. "This is my first time singing since he went to heaven, and it's my last song for William. Because after today, I think my singing days are over. There's no one left to sing to." The silence in the studio was profound. The audience, the crew, the coaches, everyone was processing the magnitude of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just an audition. This was a 92-year-old woman's final love letter to her deceased husband, delivered through the medium that had defined their relationship for 7 decades. Blake Shelton felt something he'd never experienced in all his years of coaching. Without thinking, without consulting anyone, without following any protocol, he was out of his chair and walking onto the stage. Not running this time, but moving with the respectful pace appropriate for approaching someone carrying such profound grief. "Mrs. Thompson," Blake said softly as he reached her side, May I stand with you while you sing to William?" Grace looked up at this tall country star, who had somehow appeared beside her like a guardian angel. "You would do that?" "Ma'am, it would be my honor," Blake replied, his voice thick with emotion. "If you're singing to William, then this isn't just a performance. This is something sacred, and I'd like to be here to support you through it. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming." Blake turned to address the other coaches, his voice carrying across the studio, with the reverence of someone who understood they were about to witness something holy. "Kelly, John, Niall, I need you to turn your chairs around. Not for an audition, but because Mrs. Grace is about to show us what 70 years of love sounds like when it's set to music." One by one, the coaches turned their chairs to face Grace. Kelly Clarkson was already crying, understanding, as a wife and mother, what Grace was going through. John Legend looked moved beyond words by the gravity of the moment. Niall sat forward with the kind of respectful attention that showed he recognized something extraordinary was happening. Blake gently positioned himself slightly behind and to the side of Grace, close enough to catch her if she needed support, far enough away to give her space to commune with William's memory. "Now, Mrs. Grace," Blake said softly, "I want you to forget about all of us. I want you to sing this song like William is standing right here in front of you. Like it's just the two of you in your living room the way it's been for 70 years. Grace nodded, closed her eyes, and began to sing Unchained Melody. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. Grace's voice, though aged and sometimes tremulous, carried an emotional weight that was more powerful than any technical perfection could have been. She wasn't just singing the words, she was living them, breathing them, pouring 70 years of love and 2 weeks of grief into every note. "Oh, my love, my darling, I've hungered for your touch, a long, lonely time." As Grace sang, it was as if William materialized in the studio. Everyone present could feel his presence, could imagine him standing before his beloved wife, could see the young couple dancing to this song for the first time. Grace began to sway slightly as she sang, as if she were dancing with an invisible partner, and Blake moved closer to provide gentle support. When she reached the soaring chorus, "Are you still mine?" Grace's voice broke with the weight of asking a question she would never get answered, but she continued singing through her tears, her love for William transcending even death. The studio was completely silent, except for Grace's voice and the quiet sounds of people crying. Camera operators found themselves wiping their eyes. Audience members sat with their hands pressed to their hearts. And on the coaches' platform, 4 music industry veterans sat in stunned recognition of the most authentic performance they had ever witnessed. When Grace finished, she opened her eyes and looked directly at one of the cameras, as if she could see through it to wherever William was waiting. "I love you, William," she whispered. "I hope you heard that." The silence that followed was reverent, sacred. Then Blake began to applaud, but it was different from any applause he'd ever initiated. It was gentle, respectful, the kind of recognition you give to something holy. The other coaches joined in, followed by the audience, but this wasn't celebration. It was honor, gratitude for being allowed to witness something so profoundly beautiful. All 4 coaches hit their buttons simultaneously, but everyone understood this wasn't about competition anymore. This was about recognizing that they had just experienced something that transcended any television show. Blake gently took Grace's arm to steady her as emotion threatened to overwhelm her small frame. "Mrs. Grace," Blake said, his voice thick with tears he wasn't trying to hide, "I don't have words for what you just shared with us. That wasn't just singing. That was love made audible. That was 70 years of marriage distilled into the most beautiful 4 minutes I've ever experienced." Kelly Clarkson, herself, unable to speak through her tears, managed to say, "Grace, honey, William heard every note. We all felt him here with us. Your love for him filled this entire studio." John Legend added, "That was the most powerful performance I've ever witnessed. You showed us what it sounds like when someone sings with their entire soul." Niall, clearly emotional, said simply, That was magic, Grace. Pure magic. William must be so proud. Grace chose Team Blake, not because of strategy or career goals, but because she recognized in him someone who understood that some moments are bigger than entertainment, someone who had shown her the respect and support she needed to share her final song. But Blake made an unprecedented decision. "Mrs. Grace," he said, "I want you on my team. But more than that, I want to do something we've never done before. I don't want you to compete. I want you to be our special guest, our reminder of what real music sounds like. Will you stay with us and share more songs with William?" Over the following weeks, Grace became the Voice's most beloved presence. She didn't compete in battles or knockouts, but she appeared in special segments, sharing songs that told the story of her 7-decade love affair with William. Her version of The Way You Look Tonight brought tears to millions of viewers. Her duet with Blake on When I'm 64 became a meditation on lasting love. During the finale, Grace performed one final song, Amazing Grace, which William had always said was named for her. As she sang about being found after being lost, about grace that could save even the most broken heart, there wasn't a dry eye in the studio or in homes across America. Grace never recorded an album or went on tour. She returned to Nebraska, to the house she had shared with William. But something had changed. Her voice, once locked away in grief, had been freed through sharing it with the world. She began singing again, in her church, at community gatherings, anywhere people needed to hear what 70 years of love sounded like. The walker she used on the Voice stage is now displayed in her living room, next to William's favorite chair, as a reminder of the day she finally did what he had always dreamed she would do. Blake Shelton learned something that night that changed his understanding of music forever. "Grace taught me that the most powerful voices aren't the youngest or the strongest. Sometimes they're the ones that have lived long enough to understand what love really costs, and are brave enough to share that wisdom with the world. Because sometimes the most beautiful songs are sung by voices weathered by time and strengthened by loss. Sometimes the most powerful performances come from people who have loved so deeply that music becomes their only way to express the inexpressible. And sometimes a 92-year-old widow can teach the world what it sounds like when love refuses to be silenced, even by death." Grace Thompson proved that The Voice isn't about age or perfection. It's about having something true to say, and finding the courage to say it, even when your heart is breaking, even when you're saying goodbye, even when the only person you ever wanted to sing to is listening from heaven.